On June 27, 2025, one of Israel's most impressive military operations to destroy Hezbollah terrorist bases took place. It all started with one F-15 pilot, or more accurately, it began many months ago with a daring idea and meticulous long-term planning carried out by a whole team of Israeli specialists. But the execution of the bold strike began with him, the pilot, on whose shoulders rested the responsibility for the entire operation. Under his wings were over 9,000 pounds of ordnance, 2 GBU-28 penetrating bombs hanging on his central pylons. Each weighs about 4,700 pounds, and they are the largest penetrating bombs in Israel's arsenal. But the main thing is not their size, but their shocking power, which, as it turned out, can effectively and efficiently destroy even a well-protected underground base. During preparation, the weapon systems officer sat behind the pilot, checking the APG-70 radar controls. The pilot also analyzed all systems. There was enough fuel, communications were in order, and all the complex navigation systems, the onboard computer, and other electronic components worth hundreds of thousands of dollars worked smoothly and precisely. They were cleared for takeoff. Their target was a Beaufort Ridge. In November 2024, a ceasefire agreement was concluded between Israel and the Hezbollah terrorist group, which also included a ban on the creation of terrorist bases and fortified facilities. Of course, the terrorists violated it, and for 6 months, they secretly built a new base for the next massive attack on Israel's civilian infrastructure and residents. Fortunately, Hezbollah did not foresee the quality of the work of Israeli satellites, which painstakingly collected information about the new site, which turned out to be an underground, perfectly fortified bunker. Protecting a base under a multi-ton layer of rock and soil is a surefire way to achieve maximum security. Neither 19th century shells, nor 20th century bombs, nor the most modern ammunition of our time can harm a target if it is buried deep enough and its defense is well planned. At least, that was the case until now, because Tel Aviv finally gave permission for the field use of Israel's most destructive conventional weapon, which was about to change everything. By noon, the pilot received clearance for takeoff. The Pratt & Whitney F-100 PW229 engines came to life as the heavily loaded F-15 needed every bit of its power. It was operating at its limit. After all, it wasn't a heavy target bomber, and just 2 GBU-28s accounted for almost half of the aircraft's payload capacity, and it was undoubtedly armed with other fire assets as well. Controlling the typically agile and swift jet became noticeably more difficult. It was like driving a truck instead of a familiar sports car. However, the trained crew handled it without a problem. The aircraft took off at a speed of up to 200 knots, 370 kilometers per hour, and then accelerated by an order of magnitude. It had support. Another fighter jet sped along the same trajectory, about 15 seconds behind. They had a sort of shadow as well, another pair of fighters moving along a slightly different but also carefully planned route, just behind them. By noon, 4 F-115s, combined into 2 strike pairs, were in the air and heading toward the Mediterranean Sea. This was a deceptive maneuver, because flying straight toward Lebanon could reveal their plan too early. Even though the enemy had relatively simple tracking systems, it had many hidden allies and even more sources of information. Therefore, the Israeli pilots flew over the Mediterranean Sea and then climbed into an altitude of about 35,000 feet, likely disappearing from the old Lebanese radars. Did the enemy suspect the reason for the disappearance of such formidable Israeli fighters? Perhaps, but there was no time to react. The F-115s made a detour to the north and then turned sharply east toward the target. The IDF knew that both Syria, even after the change of power there, and Russia could have detected the Israeli fighters and handed over information about them to the terrorists before this maneuver. Now, at the cost of extending the flight by about half an hour, the Israeli planes achieved the highest possible level of secrecy for their movements. The F-115s approached the coast near Netanya. The pilots configured the weapon systems while the onboard computer, in autopilot mode, carefully and quickly gained altitude according to preset criteria. The weapon configuration was complex, and had to be performed directly during the attack for maximum results. This was a real challenge for the pilots, who showed exceptional experience and skill as they set the target coordinates, fuse delay data, and impact angles for the GBU-28s in just a few minutes at full speed. At the same time, the pilots used state-of-the-art systems to constantly monitor for any signs of enemy scanning of the area. Why all these complexities in modern bombs can be dropped from a distance of several dozen miles from the target? That's a price of power. The GBU-28s are unprecedentedly powerful, but they need a high altitude to gain speed for a penetrating strike. They can be released from an altitude of at least 30,000 feet in relative proximity to the target, which makes the F-115s vulnerable even to Lebanon's simple radars. But this was an inevitable risk that had to be taken. Continuing to gain altitude, the information broke up for combat dispersal and to create a formation that could be optimal for a stealthy and powerful strike. After that, the 4 Israeli planes finally turned toward Lebanon. The operation was entering the final stretch. Before the decisive strike, they needed to blind every radar between the Lebanese coast and Damascus itself. The first strike came from the Lebanese P-18 Spoonrest radar near Tyre, operating in the VHF band 150 to 170 MHz. It could pose a real threat if not neutralized, despite its age. Therefore, all 4 F-115s simultaneously activated their electronic warfare suites, likely the Elisra SPS-2000 or a more modern equivalent. The synchronized activation was not a coincidence, as the digital radio frequency memory DRFM system quickly recorded radar signals, altered them, and sent back fake versions. So the radar was not just jammed, but effectively deceived in terms of range. Lebanon's air defense, which is actually under the control of Hezbollah terrorists, registered the Israeli jets 15 kilometers further away than their actual position. There was also deception regarding speed and flight direction. For several seconds, the Lebanese radar operators watched in confusion. The target's positions, numbers, altitudes, and flight directions changed chaotically. Although the data indicated that many of the signals were fake, because some of the F-115s, according to radar readings, were literally diving underwater, turning 90 degrees in a second, or teleporting into the stratosphere. There was no time or opportunity to track the false signals and separate them from the real ones. Of course, the operators quickly switched modes, trying to break through the interference, but the Israeli DRFM system instantly adapted, creating false reflections tailored to each new mode. Around noon, the F-115s invaded Lebanese airspace. Their altitude was optimal, 35,000 feet. The second pair flew further north. By attacking the radar network from multiple angles, they suppressed any attempts by the Lebanese military to detect the true positions of the F-115s. In addition to outdated radars, Lebanon also has modern ones that are much less susceptible to interference. Fortunately, intelligence played an important role in the operation's preparation, so the Israeli pilots were warned about this ace up the enemy's sleeve. They and their entire team carefully studied all the technical characteristics of the new radars to find their vulnerabilities. The formation performed a tactical maneuver called circling. The lead aircraft banked 30 degrees to the left. Its task was to jam the signal. Its wingman banked 30 degrees to the right. It was busy creating false reflections of the lead F-115's actual flight path. The second pair performed the same maneuver a few seconds later. At this stage, the DRFM system created quite realistic fake flight paths, mimicking the fighter's flight characteristics at a very high level. This whole tense, high-tech struggle lasted only a couple of minutes, and the F-115s reached the attack point. The formation converged diagonally, like a staircase, and the planes accelerated. Their speed quickly increased, 450 knots, 500 knots, 550 knots. The Lebanese air defense network was in shock, but had detected all the Israeli fighters. However, it was too late, as this was the climax. The F-115 pilots knew they were vulnerable, but ignored the system's warnings. It was time to strike with the most powerful conventional bombs in existence. When the fighters reached the calculated strike distance, it was a matter of reflexes. Each pilot performed the same sequence of commands: master arm on, weapon selected, release mode confirmed as auto. The weapon systems officers in the back supported the targeting pods, likely the AN/AAQ-28V Lightning or AN/AAQ-33 Sniper. Although it was possible, it was the Israeli-made Lantern. Such a pod is a high-tech targeting system that allows for jeweler-like precision even at tremendous speeds. The lead F-115 banked so that both bombs would strike perpendicular to the orientation of the tunnel system. This would maximize the damage from the strike. Satellite images have a significant drawback. They are very approximate. However, the Hezbollah underground base, although quite deep, still left a significant thermal signature. One can only assume how many weapons, ammunition, and terrorists were there. The thermal signature of such a large object inevitably seeped out due to ventilation, cooling systems, and generators, as well as the heat from hundreds of people. The F-115s descended with a precise dive angle to complicate the targeting of surface-to-air missiles in case of a counterattack. The pilots fought turbulence, making constant micro-corrections. They managed to hold the formation. These precautions may have saved the Israeli pilots a mobile air defense system, which the terrorists could have received from allies like Syria, opened fire 15 kilometers to the south. The enemy air defense system was now active and trying to shoot down the F-115s. A missile was already in the air. This was something intelligence had not warned them about, but it's impossible to foresee everything. However, that's what preparation and professionalism are for. The fighters smoothly disperse and release flares and chaff to confuse the missiles. The confused missile detonated harmlessly. The maneuver was sharp, and the fighters changed altitude drastically in a matter of seconds, which meant significant G-forces for the pilots. However, thanks to their experience and skills, they quickly restored their combat formation as if nothing had happened. Just a couple more minutes, and they finally reached the drop point. Less than 10 kilometers to the target, with an airspeed of 460 knots, the lead pilot locked the sight onto the planned impact point at the main tunnel junction. First drop. The next bombs fell in quick succession. Each one deployed small wings for stability. The GBU-28 relies on the acceleration of the drop to penetrate reinforced underground targets. The damage here is directly proportional to the speed. The first pair of bombs was meant to destroy a key element of the terrorist underground base. The second pair was to hit the exit tunnels on the other side of the ridge. They were on their way in a matter of seconds. How did the bombs manage to maintain such accuracy at such a crazy speed? As they descended, a cone of impact direction was formed thanks to the laser guidance system. As a result, the bomb's accuracy reached a margin of error of only about 3 meters, even at a huge drop speed. Meanwhile, the 4 Israeli F-115s inverted and descended closer to the ground. It was risky, but at low altitude, they were harder to hit. Behind them, the targeting pods guided the bombs, 630 kilograms of explosive in a special alloy casing that maintained its integrity as it broke through obstacles. Testing proved it could penetrate about 100 feet, about 30 meters of soil, or about 20 feet, approximately 6 meters, of reinforced concrete. But what about in practice? The experience turned out to be more impressive than any analysis or tests. The explosive energy of the 4 powerful bombs was simply colossal. The complex delayed fuse counted down, waiting for the exact moment for maximum effect. And when it happened, the terrain changed forever. When the explosive finally penetrated a key part of the base and detonated there in a confined space, the tunnel network was ripped apart by a torrent of energy, and everything was engulfed in fire. The second bomb hit a couple of seconds later, but its effect was no less. It simply pulverized what was left of the tunnels. The third and fourth bombs, but devastatingly powerful in destructive effect. From the superposition of several shockwaves, they likely amplified each other. and therefore not only penetrated the rock, but crushed and ground it with frightening efficiency. The tunnel system, which was supposed to protect against fire, instead channeled it, creating excessive pressure. And then, all this power reached what Israeli intelligence had only suspected: enormous underground hangars for storing terrorist weapons. The exact amount of equipment, weapons, and ordnance that Hezbollah militants managed to accumulate there is unknown, but it would probably have been enough to arm the army of a small country. And when the fire from the GB-228s reached them, a chain reaction occurred, blowing up all the ammunition bunkers, fuel depots, and, according to some unconfirmed reports, even an underground missile assembly plant. Of course, too little was left to speak with absolute certainty, but an analysis of the explosion's force suggests that the four bombs saved not a few hundred or even thousands of civilian lives that could have been lost to the missiles assembled there, which are regularly launched by terrorists at Israeli cities. The Hezbollah underground base, which the militants considered impregnable, was destroyed. A column of smoke and debris rose about a kilometer into the midday sky. The northern side of the Beaufort Ridge slid downward, and the Israeli pilots successfully returned home. This narrative is a product of the careful analysis of the Israeli military operation on June 27th, based on information from open sources and a scrupulous analysis of all technical data and reports. All the details remain hidden from the public, but the impressive effect and scale of the operation suggests that this course of events is the most probable.